Why do living things reproduce? What is the product of reproduction? What do you think will happen to a particular organism if every individual of its kind suddenly loses the ability to reproduce? Reproduction is one of the most important functions of all living things. It is a process by which living organisms give rise to offspring. This lesson introduces heredity, inheritance and variation, the asexual and sexual reproduction. At the end of this video, you, the learners, should be able to differentiate asexual from sexual reproduction in terms of the number of individuals involved and similarities of offspring to parents, and to describe the process of fertilization. So in order for us to learn about the inheritance and variation of the organisms, we should know about the process in making one. Reproduction is a biological process in which different organisms use their ability to produce another of their kind. Some produce a unique organism, but the same species. Some produce an offspring identical to its parent. And we call these kinds of reproduction as asexual and sexual reproduction. We will talk about the asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction only involves one parent, and it doesn't use gametes or sex cells, and the offspring are identical to their parent. We have different types of asexual reproduction. We have budding, fragmentation, binary fission, vegetative reproduction, and spore formation or sporogenesis. In budding, an organism is produced by forming an outgrowth or a bud, which comes from the parent's body. As you can see in our example, a parent organism formed a bud which was then released and was able to form and mature, just like its parent organism. Next, we have fragmentation. This is a type of asexual reproduction where an organism is produced from the detached body of its parent. As shown in our example, the starfish or the sea star reproduces by fragmentation, where it detaches a part of itself to form a new starfish that is identical to the parent starfish. Then we have the binary fission, in which a parent organism splits into two daughter organisms. For example, we start from the parent amoeba. Then the nucleus is elongated. Then we have division of the nucleus and cytoplasm, which results to two identical daughter cells. Then we have vegetative reproduction, which is also under the asexual reproduction. And in vegetative reproduction, a part of a plant is used to reproduce another plant. And in our example, we have the potato. And on a potato, we have eyes, the dark spot on the potatoes, which later on will sprout, and when planted, will rise into a new potato plant or a root crop. And the last example for asexual reproduction is the spore formation, which is also known as the sporogenesis. For example, ferns are plants that do not have flowers. Ferns generally reproduce by producing spores. Similar to flowering plants, ferns have roots, stems, and leaves. However, unlike flowering plants, ferns do not have flowers or seeds. Instead, they usually reproduce by spore formation. Fungi, such as bread molds, reproduce by spore formation. If left in a warm, dark, and moist environment, bread may grow mold. Common bread molds are fuzzy, and appear black or blue-green. Bread mold reproduces by releasing spores into the air asexually. When the spores land on an object with the correct environmental conditions, such as light, heat, water, and nutrition, they will germinate into a fuzz, then grow roots, mature, and then release spores of their own. Sexual reproduction is a type of reproduction of new living organisms by combining genetic information from two individuals of different types or sexes. Sexual reproduction is a type of reproduction that requires two individuals to combine their genetic information to produce another unique living organism. And in sexual reproduction, offspring are genetically diverse because half of its chromosome, or the genetic material of an organism, came from a male parent and the other half came from the female parent. We will now learn how animals sexually reproduce. It all starts from the development and production of male and female reproductive cells required to form a new individual, and you call that process gametogenesis. Gametogenesis happens in a male individual, and we specifically call that spermatogenesis. It is a process of forming sperm cells, also known as the male gamete, and in humans, the male gamete contains 23 chromosomes. Gametogenesis also happens in a female individual, and we call that oogenesis, and it is the process of forming the egg cells, also known as the female gamete, which also contains 23 chromosomes for humans. Creating a new life is a wonderful process, and it all starts in the phenomenon when the sperm cell makes its way to the egg cell, fertilizing and uniting together to start the first step in making life possible. And we call this process fertilization. Fertilization is the action or process of fertilizing an egg that involves the fusion of male and female gametes, forming a zygote. A zygote is a cell formed by the fertilization event caused by the unity of the sperm cell and the egg cell. The zygote now have 46 chromosomes, 23 from the mother and 23 from the father. Then the zygote rapidly divides and develops more cells, which will result in forming a rough humanoid organism called an embryo. And it keeps on developing cells, and some of them will be a part of the organ, and that will be developed on the coming days and months. And after a few months, some organs like the heart, the brain, skin are starting to form, and we now call that a fetus. It is the unborn offspring of an organism. It is still developing, and when the time comes and it is finally developed, it will now become a baby and will not need to be encapsulated inside a womb or an egg anymore. And that's the process of fertilization, from the unity of the sperm and the egg cell to forming a zygote, which will ultimately lead in creating a baby, a unique new individual. We have two types of sexual reproduction or fertilization. First, we have external fertilization, and the second is the internal fertilization. External fertilization is a mode of sexual reproduction which a male parent's sperm cell fertilizes a female parent's egg cell outside of the female parent's body. And our example for that are in the case of goldfish. The female goldfish releases its egg cell in the water. Then, the male goldfish also releases its sperm cell to the area where the female goldfish released its egg cell. Sperm cells will now find its way to an egg cell and fertilizes it outside of their parent. Same things happen in frogs. Another example of an organism that utilizes external fertilization are in chickens. The rooster injects his sperm inside the hen. Then, the hen develops a special protective shell we call an egg. And when the process of making the shell is over, it is now then released in the environment, letting the baby chick inside to develop until it hatches. The second type of sexual reproduction or fertilization is the internal fertilization. It is a mode of sexual reproduction which a male parent's sperm fertilizes a female parent's egg cell inside the female's body. Example for that is us, the Homo sapiens, or the humans. Another example of organisms that uses internal fertilization are the Canis lupus familiaris, or the dogs. Not just the animals are capable in doing sexual reproduction, but plants too. And sexual reproduction in plants happen when the flowering plants reproduce sexually through a process called pollination. In order to fully understand the process of pollination, let us first talk about the parts of a flower. First, we have the stigma. It is the male reproductive organ of plants. It is the part of the flower where the pollen or the reproductive cells of the plants germinates. Germinate meaning to begin to grow. The stigma is supported by the style, and its role is to assist in the process of fertilization. Then we have the anther, and it is the part of the flower where the pollen or the reproductive cells of the plant are reproduced. Then the filament, it supports the anther. And collectively, this part, from stigma to filament, are parts of the pistil, which is connected to the ovary of the female reproductive organ of the plants. An ovary is located at the base of the pistil, and its primary function is to develop and produce ovules, which becomes the seed to be spread and planted to sprout another plant and flower. The flower has the male and the female reproductive organs of the plant, and in some cases, the plant can do self-pollination, where it can produce seeds using its own reproductive cells. And you might be thinking that it is an asexual reproduction thing to do, and you will be correct. Plants are immobile, meaning they cannot move to places. They have developed ways to spread their reproductive cells to another organism by wind or by butterflies or bees. But it doesn't happen every single time because plants are just far apart and the pollens cannot be transported anymore. So plants developed ways to reproduce sexually and asexually. So here's how pollination works. The flower produces pollen, and it is located on the anther. An organism is then attracted to the plant because of its color and the nectar that is also produced by plants. And as the organism, or in our example, the butterfly move around, the pollens are also attached on the body of the butterfly, which will now be transported by the butterfly unknowingly but not harmful. Pollens are transported to another flower. As the butterfly flies to another flower that it could find, then the pollens are attached to another stigma of another plant, which will initiate the process of fertilization in plants. Let us now compare asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. In asexual reproduction, only a single parent is involved, but in sexual reproduction, two parents are involved by fertilizing the egg cell by the sperm cell. In asexual reproduction, the new organism is formed from the parent, which makes them identical to each other and to their ancestors. And in sexual reproduction, two individuals are needed, and their offspring are different from their parents in many aspects. And that is for asexual and sexual reproduction.